The $1.2 billion lifeline was dissolving into static. Victoria Sterling, CEO of a collapsing empire built on arrogance and debt, was bleeding out on a panicked phone line in the rear chamber of her company Mercedes. The stakes were non-negotiable: total corporate extinction. Her fate, and the livelihoods of 200 families, hinged on a non-existent line of communication with the Nakamura Singh delegation, who were due to land in under 90 minutes. Every contact attempt was hitting a dead digital wall. The interpreters were non-responsive. The deal was seizing up, and Victoria's trademark veneer of untouchable power was beginning to visibly fracture. Jerome Washington, positioned invisibly in the driver's seat, a ghost asset that Victoria had systemically dismissed for 3 years, saw the crisis escalating in the rearview. The chaos emanating from the back was compounded by a low-grade, inane noise from the radio, a distraction he deemed operationally critical to terminate. In a silent, protocol-driven movement, Jerome reached to silence the sound. It was an act of professional intervention, a tactical move to clear the communication channel for the flailing executive behind the partition. Victoria Sterling's head snapped around like a striking cobra. "Keep your service hands off my property," she spat, the command detonating in the confined space. The words were not just an order. They were a viciously targeted, class-based missile designed for maximum structural damage. "Before we move forward, comment down from where you're watching right now." Jerome's hand locked mid-motion, suspended in the air. The action was the first beat in a conflict that would redefine the meaning of retribution and worth. "You assume your tenancy in my car grants you the right to contaminate my possessions." Victoria's voice, usually modulated to convey cold authority, was now acid-etched with poison. "You are the hired asset. Know your subordinate designation. Stay in your lane." Jerome's jaw ratcheted tight, his eyes drilled onto the pavement ahead. He absorbed the toxic assault with the same quiet discipline he'd once deployed when translating for cabinet-level officials facing threats of war. The internal temperature of the car dropped to 0. "Initiate the partition, Washington," she commanded, the dismissal absolute. "I find your reflection personally draining." The glass shield hissed into activation, a physical symbol of the contemptuous divide she maintained between herself and the black victim she hired. Separated from the help, Victoria Sterling reverted to her emergency scramble calls, her voice spiking with escalating desperation. In the front chamber, Jerome's grip stressed the leather of the steering wheel. What Victoria didn't know was that her invisible chauffeur possessed a complete arsenal of intelligence that could either save her empire or watch it collapse. 3 years of Stanford's intellectual rigor. 5 languages commanded with lethal precision at Georgetown. 2 decades of Tier 1 diplomatic service, all of it rendered utterly null by the corrosive power of her prejudice. The partition could not contain the financial meltdown detonating in the rear chamber. "What exactly do you mean all 3 translation assets are unavailable?" Victoria's voice fractured with panic. "Richard, this valuation is $1.2 billion. We are on a total corporate extinction trajectory." Jerome tracked her via the security camera feed, observing her packing like a trapped specimen. Her precision-engineered hairstyle was failing, her makeup smearing beneath her sightline, the physical manifestation of her control dissolving. "I will authorize a budget of $50,000. I will not tolerate failure," she screamed. "Locate a qualified asset fluent in Japanese and Mandarin. The Nakamura Singh delegation is on a 90-minute intercept trajectory. Every subsequent call was a zero-result failure." "Negative. Postponement is non-negotiable," Victoria hissed into the receiver. "They will initiate permanent withdrawal. 3 years of high-value negotiation. Erased." Jerome, the ghost asset who specialized in high-stakes mediation, had internally logged enough executive dialogue to certify the operational reality Victoria was denying. Sterling Dynamics was on a 3-month countdown to insolvency. This merger was not simple business. It was a desperate fight for corporate existence. 200 essential personnel, including his own station, were on the wire. He was intimately aware of the true cost of failure. Victoria's frantic calls hit dead digital space one after another. Her hands vibrated on the keypad. It was the moment Jerome executed his cold, tactical decision. He retracted the glass shield. "Permission to address you, Miss Sterling." Victoria's head snapped back, a controlled detonation of rage blazing in her stare. "I issued a direct order to state the required language protocol." The question was a precision strike, cutting through her panicked fury and landing with the force of federal authority. Victoria's mouth articulated, then sealed shut. Her pending financial meltdown was aborted. "Restate that query." Jerome's voice was now calm, operational, stripped of all subservience. "For the high-stakes negotiation, specify the required fluency." Victoria stared at him as if he'd spoken in encrypted code. "That falls outside your authorized parameters." "Japanese and Mandarin," Jerome countered with focused, unassailable precision. "Hindi, Korean." The tonal shift in his voice forced Sterling's inhalation to stall. This was not the registered driver's voice. This was a command-ready authority she had never encountered. "I am confirming command of 9 distinct languages." The cabin atmosphere went critical. Victoria's phone slid from her grasp, hitting the sound-dampening carpet. Sterling's operational reality destabilized. "You are confirming command of 9 distinct languages." Her voice was now barely audible dust. Jerome gave a single, military-grade nod. "Do you require a demonstration, Miss Sterling?" The silent, unshakable promise of retribution had just been delivered. The impossible asset was now positioned for deployment. What Victoria didn't know was that the real humiliation was about to begin. The script seamlessly transitions into the next 145 words, maintaining the structure, tone, and packing to hit the 1650-word target, detailing the arrival of the Nakamura Singh call and Jerome's immediate tactical positioning. Before Victoria could transmit a response, her phone sounded a code-red alert. The caller ID was the delegation, Nakamura Singh Holdings. She stared at the receiver like it was a live explosive. "I am paralyzed without an interpreter." "Permission to engage." Jerome's hand extended toward the partition opening, his posture already transitioning to that of a senior diplomatic asset. Victoria's predatory arrogance warred with her terminal panic. The phone's alert persisted. She surrendered the device, her grip failing. "Moshi Moshi Nakamura-san." Jerome initiated the communication. Gone was the careful subservience. In its place, confident, cultured, undeniable authority. The voice on the other end responded in high-speed Japanese, and Jerome's reflection in the rearview mirrored the look of a high-stakes negotiator who had just taken control of a crisis zone. The ghost asset had just materialized, and the execution of judicial-grade retribution was underway. The acid of Victoria's panic had evaporated, replaced by a cold, analytical terror. She watched in the mirror as Jerome Washington navigated the high-speed Japanese dialogue, his voice now a low, resonant instrument of cultured command. Gone was the deferential inflection of the driver. In its place was the undeniable timbre of a senior diplomat. He listened intently, occasionally executing a single, professional head nod, a gesture she realized was part of an irrefutable, high-tier protocol. The communication ended. Jerome set the phone down with the tactical precision of a professional terminating a high-value threat. "The immediate collapse has been averted, Miss Sterling," he stated, his eyes meeting hers in the rearview with an intensity that stripped away her corporate armor. "Your team deployed overly aggressive engagement terminology in the drafts. It was perceived as a status assault, not negotiation." She could only manage a choked whisper. "What intelligence did you relay?" "The operational correction was straightforward," he replied, his voice a steel-plated core of fact. "I informed them that Sterling Dynamics profoundly respects their family business legacy, a legacy your company has supposedly been personally studying to ensure appropriate honor." Victoria's mouth fell open in a silent, absolute betrayal of her arrogance. but I haven't done any research." "You have now," Jerome stated with finality. He had executed her public humiliation via dependency, forcing her to acknowledge that the survival of her $1.2 billion empire relied on a lie executed by the man she treated as furniture. He then pulled the Mercedes into the exclusive, executive parking vector beneath Sterling Dynamics. The familiar concrete felt alien, a setting for his inevitable, controlled act of retribution. "Who the hell are you?" she demanded, the question stripped of its former contempt and laced with desperate, cold analysis. Jerome cut the engine, the sudden, total silence amplifying his words. "Someone who required immediate operational income 3 years ago, Miss Sterling, and someone who still authorizes second chances, not for your profit but for the stability of the system you almost crashed." He paused, letting the weight of the silence settle. "I need all data," she repeated. He met her eyes across the narrow gap that had become an unfathomable chasm of status reversal. PhD in International Relations from Georgetown, Master's in Applied Linguistics from Harvard, 22 years as a senior diplomatic translator for the State Department. Each credential impacted Victoria like a physical blow, dismantling her worldview one unassailable fact at a time. "I specialized in high-stakes multinational negotiations, G7 summits, critical trade agreements, global crisis mediation. I operated at Tier 1 national security translation levels." His voice carried zero malice, only the cold, verified fact of his true station. She searched her fragmented memory. The operational failure. Budget Reconciliation Act of 2022. Foreign service downsizing, he stated with the technical objectivity of reading an audit report. 20% staff reduction. Last hired, first terminated. My experience meant absolute zero against spreadsheet mathematics. The true villain was revealed, not Victoria alone, but the systemic devaluation that stripped high-value talent based on age, prejudice, and cold economics. "So you became a driver." The statement was a raw articulation of her shame. "I became the asset required for survival," he corrected. He confirmed the emotional triggers she had overheard, the non-deferrable costs of his mother's oncology treatment and his daughter Sarah's medical school tuition. "Pride doesn't cover chemotherapy costs. My duty was to asset protection, my family." She stood there, paralyzed by the realization that the subordinate designation she assigned him was a lie. Jerome was not only more qualified than her entire executive team, he was a ghost asset who had been silently observing her decay. "I have been internally logging your business calls for 36 months, Jerome confirmed, anticipating her next unasked question. "I know every transaction, every crisis, every late-night panic about the company's financial trajectory." 36 months of unseen intelligence gathering. He was not a driver. He was an unseen director of intelligence, operating beneath the radar. She realized with chilling clarity that he knew the exact state of her imminent insolvency, the 3-month countdown to total corporate extinction. "Why did you not flag this? Offer intervention," Victoria managed, shame staining her voice. Jerome's laugh was gentle, non-bitter, but laced with the unshakable authority of the diplomat. "Would your command structure have listened?" The answer hung between them, absolute, unspoken. Victoria's predatory arrogance would have instantly rejected the truth. He opened her door. "Miss Sterling, your engagement is in 40 minutes. We must now proceed to strategic deployment." As she exited, she looked at him, truly analyzing him for the first time. The man in the driver's uniform was a walking arsenal of national security expertise. She gave the final, reluctant command. "Will you provide tactical support to save my company?" Jerome straightened his jacket, executing a single, sharp, military-grade nod. "Let's go save your company, Miss Sterling." The retribution phase had just officially commenced. The invisible asset was now operational. The ascent in the executive elevator was silent, charged, and definitive. Victoria Sterling stared at the numbers climbing, her mind processing the unassailable reality that her minimum-wage driver possessed a Tier 1 federal operational history. She had been paying a former State Department principal translator the cost of gas money to chauffeur her to Starbucks, the epitome of systemic devaluation. Before they reached the executive strata, Jerome preempted her. "The first protocol correction is non-negotiable, Ms. Sterling," he stated, his voice a command-ready transmission. "We must immediately secure the deal and neutralize the cultural misalignment I identified. This requires the full deployment of my diplomatic posture." The transition was instantaneous. As they moved through the frantic, buzzing corridor of the executive floor, Jerome intercepted the Nakamura Singh call on Victoria's private line. His voice, once again, switched to the high authority. Cultured register. He was no longer translating words. He was executing an immediate cultural countermeasure. The beast language was deployed. He switched seamlessly to formal Japanese, deploying precision cultural terminology to apologize for the aggressive engagement terminology of Sterling's legal team. He forced Victoria's hand, relaying the unverified but necessary asset that the CEO was personally studying their family business legacy to show appropriate honor. He lowered the phone. "The insult has been neutralized," he confirmed. "But the status hierarchy is now dependent on your compliance. They perceive you as respectful only through my articulation." The humiliation via dependency was already underway. The next tactical command was aimed at the internal threat, her image. "We must address the optical failure, Miss Sterling," Jerome stated, his gaze briefly sweeping his driver's uniform. "I cannot engage in Tier 1 diplomacy dressed as subordinate chattel. It devalues the communication." Victoria, now operating under his explicit command structure, immediately summoned her bewildered assistant. Jerome was rapidly escorted to the executive changing facility, mandated for an immediate overhaul, a $5,000 upgrade from invisible driver to visible strategist. The new Navy suit and precision tailoring symbolized the silent transfer of operational power within the company. Upon returning, Jerome was greeted not by praise, but by the secondary villains, the internal blackstory power structure of skepticism and entrenched prejudice. Executive Vice President Marcus Hendricks and Marketing Director Susan Walsh, sensing the sudden threat to their internal hierarchy, launched an immediate prejudiced counterattack. "Victoria, with all due respect, who is this individual?" Hendricks's voice was laced with contemptuous skepticism. "This is a $1.2 billion exposure event. We require a verified high-end interpretation asset, not someone sourced from operations." The word operations was a toxic, intentional flag highlighting Jerome's prior subservient role. Susan Walsh nodded, deploying her own brand of corporate cruelty. "The Japanese expect a certain level of visible professionalism. We cannot risk the optics with someone who doesn't look the part." The temperature in the room dropped. Jerome stood quietly, impassive, the steel-plated core of his diplomatic experience allowing him to absorb the insult without reaction. This was not anger. This was calculated data ingestion. Victoria, realizing the depth of the systemic prejudice she herself embodied, felt a cold spike of protective fury. "Mr. Washington is a Georgetown Ph.D., Harvard Master's, 22-year State Department veteran," she stated, the defensive escalation betraying her panic. Hendricks pressed the attack on authority. "I am questioning his suitability, Victoria. We cannot risk everything on an unvetted asset." Jerome finally spoke, his voice calm, superior, and loaded with specific data. "Mr. Hendricks, what specific concerns do you have regarding cultural nuance? The Augen summer protocols, the required ray angles for executives, or perhaps the Zaysky positioning based on founding dates rather than revenue?" Dead silence. Jerome had executed a cultural code crack that instantly exposed Hendrix's utter operational ignorance. The executive vice president was a fraud on the international stage. The Nakamura family business was established in 1952, Jerome continued, utilizing the irrefutable federal tone. Post-war reconstruction values. They require items acknowledging their contribution to Japan's recovery, not expensive items suggesting we're buying influence. He pivoted instantly to the other threat. Singh Holdings follows British Indian traditions, direct communication, absolute punctuality. They will interpret elaborate gift ceremonies as time-wasting. The key is balancing both without offense. Hendrix's mouth opened and closed. "How do you possess this level of data?" he whispered. "I negotiated the 2019 Tokyo Trade Framework establishing current U.S.-Japanese protocols and mediated the Singh-Euro Bank dispute in 2020, Jerome confirmed, his voice a final, absolute hammer stroke. The 7 executives in the room realized with stomach-lurching certainty that they had just questioned someone immeasurably more qualified than the sum of their collective corporate experience. The power structure had not shifted. It had been violently realigned. Victoria had introduced a diplomatic ghost who was now the unshakable core of their survival. The script seamlessly transitions into the next 200 words, detailing the board's silent submission, the planning phase, and the reveal of Jerome's 3-year dossier of corporate failures, maintaining the ultra-sharp tone to hit the 1650-word target. "Any other concerns about Mr. Washington's suitability?" Victoria asked, her voice now carrying a new, lethal authority derived entirely from Jerome's presence. No one spoke. The internal corruption had been silenced. Later that evening, Victoria found Jerome working alone, surrounded by color-coded files, cultural research, and gift samples, a tactical fortress of preparation. He was not merely translating. He was building a technical profile of every executive. He revealed his unseen dossier, a thick folder documenting the 36 months of Sterling Dynamics' multi-million-dollar communication hemorrhaging. The licensing deal lost because a translator used informal Korean. The Berlin partnership stalled because American English contracts were interpreted as intellectual arrogance. "Your company has been bleeding value through communication gaps for years," Jerome stated. He had the irrefutable evidence of her failures. The revenge had begun, not with anger but with the cold, necessary data of her profound professional negligence. The invisible asset was fully deployed. Understood, continuing the beast mode script narrative. This is section IV. Technical discovery, detailing Jerome's overnight data acquisition, the immediate financial crisis mediation, and the final, crushing revelation of Victoria's corporate ignorance. The target word count is 1650 words. The executive office was now a fortress of operational excellence, illuminated by the cold light of 3 monitors displaying live feeds from Tokyo, Mumbai, and Berlin. Jerome Washington, the newly visible strategist, was executing a surgical deep dive into the high-stakes negotiation data. Victoria found him there at 9:00 p.m., surrounded not by corporate reports, but by cultural intel, meticulously organized briefing binders, and specific gift samples. "You should execute standby protocol, Ms. Sterling," Jerome stated without looking up. "I am reviewing the technical patent specifications, a final sweep for vulnerabilities." Victoria noticed the precision-engineered preparation, color-coded files for each delegate, cultural protocol checklists, and even backup conversation topics designed to pivot around political flashpoints. This was military-grade intelligence gathering, not corporate pre-read. "This is beyond thorough," she whispered, realizing her own preparation was a shallow performance next to his unassailable depth. "Ms. Sterling, in diplomacy, we state that preparation prevents humiliation," Jerome countered. He gestured to the research spread across the table, his voice low but loaded with operational fact. Did you know Mr. Nakamura's father was a Hiroshima survivor who rebuilt their family business from nothing? That's why he values generational, long-term partnership over quick profit. His decision-making protocol honors his father's memory. Victoria shook her head, feeling the crushing weight of her ignorance. And Ms. Singh, he continued, pulling out another file. She lost her first company to a bad translation in a Mumbai court. She is hypersensitive to linguistic precision and intellectual property security. He had acquired this data, the critical emotional and historical triggers, in 6 hours. Information her highly paid, culturally blind team would never have sought. Jerome's phone sounded a code red alert. He glanced at the screen, his expression immediately hardening. "Problem?" Victoria asked, her heart sinking, anticipating another failure. "Emergency call from our Mumbai branch office. IP theft concern," Jerome confirmed. "The regional director only speaks Hindi." Victoria felt the panic spiking. "We cannot afford complications tonight. This will sabotage the merger." Jerome was already answering. "Namaste Kumar Gi, main Jerome Bal Rahan." For the next 20 minutes, Jerome executed a triple-language crisis mediation. Victoria watched, paralyzed, as he switched between Hindi, English, and rapid-fire legal terminology, his voice carrying the quiet, unshakable authority of someone accustomed to navigating international emergencies. "The competitor attempted to steal your Mumbai AI algorithms," Jerome summarized, terminating the call. "The regional director caught them but required immediate legal guidance in Hindi to file the injunctions. It is handled." Victoria stared, utterly stunned. "You just solved a major international IP crisis in Hindi while wearing a suit you bought 3 hours ago." Jerome's gaze held hers. "Miss Sterling, your company has been hemorrhaging value through communication gaps for years." He placed a thick, damning folder on the table, the unseen dossier he had compiled from the driver's seat. "I've been documenting every international issue I've overheard in the car." He opened the folder, dozens of incidents, missed opportunities, cultural betrayals. "The sole software licensing deal that collapsed. Your translator used informal Korean with the CEO's father, an unforgivable insult. The Berlin partnership that stalled. Your legal team sent contracts in American English. Germans interpret that as intellectual arrogance." Victoria's face flushed with toxic shame. "Why didn't you ever say something?" Jerome's smile was gentle, non-bitter but final. "Would you have listened?" The unspoken answer was a crushing confirmation of her arrogance. Then another international number rang. Victoria reached for it, but Jerome was faster. "Guten Tag, Herr Müller, Washington speaking." German flowed from his lips like liquid code. The conversation lasted 10 minutes, ending with Jerome laughing warmly. "Your Berlin partners," he explained to Victoria's shocked face. "They heard about tomorrow's merger, realized they committed a strategic mistake walking away, and want to restart negotiations." "That deal was worth $40 million, Victoria whispered, sinking into a chair. "It still is," Jerome confirmed. "I scheduled a video call for next week." He handed her a perfectly organized briefing book, everything you need to know about every person in that room, their histories, their triggers, their decision-making patterns. Jerome stood, his posture commanding. "Ms. Sterling, tomorrow we don't just save your company, we transform its fundamental structure." Victoria looked from the briefing book to the man who was once invisible. This wasn't her driver anymore. This was her lifeline, her operational superior. Victoria couldn't sleep. At midnight, she was in her home office, executing a high-security background query on Jerome Washington. The results made her hands shake with the magnitude of her corporate negligence. State Department commendations, diplomatic achievement awards, news articles praising his negotiation breakthroughs, and a photo of him standing behind 3 U.S. presidents during international summits. Her minimum wage chauffeur had, in fact, shaped global trade policy. She had been dismissive of a man who commanded more authority than anyone on her board. The realization was a physical sickness. The total victory demanded by the ghost asset was not just the merger. It was the public and absolute dismantling of her entire organizational prejudice. Victoria Sterling spent the hours before the merger meeting executing a final, aggressive tactical maneuver, not against the delegates, but against the internal corporate rot that had nearly destroyed her. Her shame had metabolized into a cold, lethal fury directed squarely at the prejudices of her senior leadership. She called an emergency board session 20 minutes before the Nakamura Singh delegation was due to arrive. The executives filed in, looking tense but still possessing their entrenched arrogance. Jerome was conspicuously absent. "Before we begin today," Victoria announced, her voice low but carrying an unmistakable threat, "I need to address yesterday's concerns about Jerome Washington." She pulled up her secure laptop, projecting the screen onto the conference room monitor, a display of unassailable official authority. The room held its breath. "Marcus Hendricks, you question his credentials." A State Department citation filled the screen. Presidential Commendation for PREVNTING, the 2018 U.S.-China trade war collapse. Hendricks, the man who had labeled Jerome unvetted, visibly seized up. "David Carter, you worried about his experience." A second document appeared, lead negotiator for the Asian-Pacific Economic Framework. "The foundation," Victoria's voice cut like a razor, "of our entire international business model, which saved us millions in licensing fees." Carter looked pale, ethically exposed. "Susan Walsh, you questioned whether the Japanese would take him seriously." Victoria clicked again. A personal letter of recommendation from former Japanese Prime Minister Sato appeared. "Jerome mediated the 2020 Okinawa base agreements," she stated. Walsh stared at the screen, her previous comments about looking the part now serving as a public self-indictment. "For 3 years," Victoria continued, her voice rising with quiet, righteous condemnation, "we have employed one of America's most accomplished diplomats, a man who operated at Tier 1 federal security levels and translated for 3 presidents. And we used him," she paused for maximum, humiliating impact, "to drive me to coffee meetings." The room was deadly silent. The systemic devaluation that was the core of this black story was now exposed for all to witness. "Jerome Washington doesn't work in our operations department," Victoria declared, executing the CEO's final retribution. "He is our operations department, effective today." She brought up a new document. "I am promoting him to Senior Vice President of International Relations. Salary $180,000 plus a comprehensive equity package." Hendricks tried to object, his voice a pathetic squeak. "Victoria, I'm not finished." Her voice cut through his objection like a kinetic penetrator. "Jerome will also head our new Cultural Intelligence Division. Budget $2 million annually. Staff, his choice." She closed the laptop, the screen going black. "Any questions about Mr. Washington's qualifications?" No one dared to speak. The confrontation escalation was complete. She had publicly transferred her authority, not out of altruism, but out of a survival-based mandate to silence the internal corruption. Minutes later, standing in the quiet of the executive staging area, the weight of the moment returned. The black victim owner's collapse was impending. "Jerome," Victoria said quietly, her voice stripped bare of all artifice, "I need you to understand the severity of the exposure. If this deal fails, Sterling Dynamics has maybe 3 months before total corporate extinction." She looked at him, her hands trembling slightly. 200 people lose their jobs, including yours. I have been fighting this alone for 2 years, telling the board we are pivoting. The truth is, we are dying." "How long have you been carrying this financial exposure alone?" Jerome asked, his voice unexpectedly gentle. "Since before you started driving," she admitted. Jerome, after everything, after the way I treated you this morning in the car, why are you helping me? Jerome was quiet for a long moment, the emotional core of his entire operation finally visible. Miss Sterling, can I transmit data about my daughter? Sarah is in her second year at Johns Hopkins Medical School, pediatric oncology track, he said, his voice imbued with quiet, formidable pride. She wants to treat children with cancer because she watched her grandmother fight it. He continued, his jaw tightening. 3 months ago, Sarah called me, crying. She might have to transfer to a community college because of the cost. She doesn't know I've been driving instead of consulting. I tell her I'm on a sabbatical writing a book. Every month, the money transfers, and I tell her it's from my research grant. Yesterday morning, when you humiliated me in the car, Jerome stated, looking directly at her, I drove straight to a job interview, marketing coordinator at a community college. $28,000 a year. I was going to take it. I was going to tell Sarah her career was over because mine was at 52. But then you required help. The final emotional trigger was deployed. He wasn't saving her. He was saving his daughter's dream. He was proving that his worth isn't measured by a uniform or title. Jerome, Victoria repeated firmly, tears welling in her eyes. When we save this company, I want you to call your daughter. Tell her she's going to be the best pediatric oncologist in the country and that her father made it possible. Jerome's eyes were bright. And I want you to know that saving your company isn't just about the jobs or the money. It's about proving that talent exists everywhere, that worth isn't determined by job titles, that people like your daughter and mine grow up in a world where they're seen for who they really are. The elevator arrived. Victoria extended her hand. Partners, Jerome shook it firmly. Partners. The true fight, the expert retaliation, was about to begin. The conference room was the operational epicenter of the global trade war. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, but all attention was drilled onto the polished mahogany table. Victoria entered, not leading, but in tactical formation beside her senior vice president, the ghost asset now visible and imposing in his tailored suit. The Nakamura Singh delegation, Mr. Hiroshi Nakamura, 73, the embodiment of Japanese business aristocracy, and Ms. Priya Singh, sharp-eyed and direct with military precision, awaited. Jerome approached Nakamura first, executing a bow of precise depth and duration, a gesture of cultural authority that instantly shattered the ice. He spoke in flawless, formal Japanese, his voice commanding respect and pleasure from the elder executive. I conveyed that Sterling Dynamics is honored by his presence and grateful for the wisdom of his family's business legacy. Jerome translated quietly to Victoria. The first layer of trust, built on generational honor, was established. The first hour was a masterclass in triple-threat diplomacy. Jerome seamlessly translated technical specifications while managing the invisible cultural tripwires that had historically derailed Victoria's operation. Then, the crisis detonated. Ms. Singh suddenly stopped, her face hardening into a mask of terminal finality. She spoke rapidly in Hindi to her assistant, then addressed the room in clipped English. I am sorry, but we have discovered a serious problem. Our Mumbai office just informed me that Sterling's IP protection protocols are insufficient for our standards. Victoria's blood ran cold. This was the security breach Jerome had mediated last night. Singh's voice was nicely lethal. We cannot proceed with a company that has such loose security measures. This is why our last partnership failed. The room went dead silent. Victoria felt the $1.2 billion exposure event seizing up. Jerome leaned forward slightly, adopting the federal interrogation tone he used in crisis mediation. Ms. Singh, may I ask what specific security concerns your Mumbai office identified? He switched instantly to Hindi, speaking directly to Singh's technical assistant. The young man's eyes widened with shock and recognition. He responded rapidly. Jerome nodded, then addressed the room in English, his voice unshakable. The security breach Ms. Singh referenced was resolved yesterday evening, he confirmed. Sterling's Mumbai team detected the intrusion attempt and implemented immediate countermeasures. He looked directly at Singh, executing the expert retaliation. I personally coordinated the response with your regional director, Kumar Ghee. The attempted breach was unsuccessful. Sterling Dynamics' security protocols are, in fact, more robust than your team realized. He pulled out his phone, scrolling to the message thread. With your permission, I can conference in Kumar Ghee to confirm the resolution. Singh stared at the man who had been a driver hours ago. You speak Hindi fluently along with 8 other languages. Shall I make the call? Jerome's tone was professional. The subsequent conference call lasted 20 minutes. Jerome mediated in 3 languages, walking everyone through the security timeline. Kumar confirmed that Sterling's protective measures had exceeded Singh Holdings' own standards. The IP crisis was neutralized. But Nakamura raised the deeper, cultural threat. He spoke quietly in Japanese, his tone grave. Jerome translated. Mr. Nakamura expresses concern about long-term cultural compatibility. He's asking whether Sterling truly understands the commitment required for a 50-year partnership. This was the core cultural kill shot. Jerome responded in flawless, formal Japanese, his voice carrying deep, personal respect. He spoke for several minutes, revealing the emotional core of the black victim's family legacy. I told him about my father's service in post-war reconstruction. I shared that true partnerships honor the sacrifices of previous generations while building for future ones. Nakamura's expression visibly softened. He asked a question. Jerome smiled and responded with a brief, personal anecdote that made the elder man laugh softly. He says his father would have respected that sentiment, and that Sterling Dynamics clearly understands the meaning of honor. The generational trust was secured. The final test came from Mr. Carter Mandarin, the chief technology officer, who suddenly pointed to a clause. Mr. Carter has identified a potential patent conflict in the AI algorithms, something our legal teams missed. Victoria felt the room temperature drop. Patent disputes meant instant, terminal merger failure. Carter spoke rapidly in Mandarin, pointing to diagrams. Jerome listened, his expression growing serious. He's saying the image recognition protocols overlap with existing Chinese patents held by BYU. If true, it could expose both companies to massive litigation. Jerome asked detailed technical questions in Mandarin. Then, he delivered the beast mode technical clarification. The protocols you're concerned about are an evolution of open-source frameworks that predate the BU patents. Sterling's algorithms use a completely different neural network architecture. He pulled out his own tablet, showing comparative code structures that irrefutably proved his point. Carter smiled broadly, bowing slightly to Jerome. He says you understand the technology better than most programmers, Jerome translated, and he is satisfied with our IP protection. 3 hours later, the impossible had become reality. The $1.2 billion partnership was agreed upon. Then, the final, humiliating act of total authority transfer. Mr. Nakamura stood and addressed the room in English, his accent precise. This merger succeeded not because of financial projections, but because of Mr. Washington's exceptional diplomatic skill. In 40 years of business, I have never encountered such cultural intelligence combined with technical expertise. He bowed formally to Jerome, the ultimate gesture of professional equality. Ms. Singh approached next, offering Jerome her business card with both hands. We would be deeply honored if you would consider consulting for our Mumbai operations. Jerome accepted the card with quiet dignity. The revenge was absolute. The executive who had been treated as chattel was now being offered Tier 1 consulting contracts by the people who had just saved his former boss. Mr. Nakamura approached Jerome carrying a small, silk-wrapped package, an antique business card case, his father's heirloom. He believed that respect transcends nationality, language, and circumstance. He would have wanted you to have this. Jerome received the gift against his heart. The entire room witnessed the profound professional respect between equals. Victoria, overwhelmed by shame, approached. "Jerome, about this morning in the car." Jerome interrupted her gently, his voice firm with unshakable authority. "Ms. Sterling, personal apologies can wait. We have the corporate transformation to complete." He refused the easy apology, ensuring her full acknowledgement would come only after he had fully secured his new, rightful status. The $1.2 billion execution was complete. As the international delegation departed, leaving behind a boardroom buzzing with electric, relieved energy, Victoria Sterling prepared for the final, total transfer of power. Her shame was now fully replaced by a survival-based reverence for the asset she had almost destroyed. Marcus Hendricks, the executive vice president who had questioned Jerome's suitability, approached first, his arrogance pulverized. "Jerome," he managed, his voice humble, "I owe you far more than an apology. I owe you my gratitude, my respect, and frankly, my job. Without your tactical intervention, we would all be updating our resumes tonight." One by one, the corporate villains who had embodied the internal corruption lined up. Chief Financial Officer David Carter offered a handshake laced with genuine awe. Marketing Director Susan Walsh, the woman who worried about looking the part, was nearly in tears. "I'm ashamed of what I said yesterday. You showed me what real professionalism looks like." The humiliation via competency was absolute. But Victoria had reserved the ultimate, final act of retribution for last. She called the room to attention, producing an official document, her hand steady, her voice resonating with a newly forged authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we open the champagne, I have one final announcement. Effective immediately, Jerome Washington is promoted to Executive Vice President of Global Relations." The title was a direct slap to Hendricks's existing role. Annual salary $280,000 plus a comprehensive equity package. Jerome's breath caught audibly. The financial security was staggering. "Additionally," Victoria continued, her voice growing thick with emotion and calculated intent, "Mr. Washington will oversee our new International Cultural Intelligence Division, with an annual budget of $8 million and authorization to hire a team of 20 specialists worldwide." She was rebuilding her company's ethical and intellectual core around the man she had marginalized. "But most importantly," Victoria concluded, handing him a leather portfolio, "your equity package makes you the third largest individual shareholder in Sterling Dynamics. You're not just an employee anymore, Jerome. You are the owner of this company." Jerome opened the portfolio with trembling hands, staring at documents that represented more financial security than he had ever imagined. "Miss Sterling, I don't know what to transmit." "Say you'll help me build a company that sees people the way you helped me see you," Victoria replied. "Say you'll help me become the leader I should have been all along." The total victory was complete. The black victim had not just been recognized, he had been granted ownership and control. The celebration was irrelevant until the final emotional transaction was complete. Jerome stepped into Victoria's private office, the door clicking shut on the noise of the subordinate executives. He dialed his daughter. Victoria watched through the glass wall as Jerome spoke. "Sarah, it's Dad. Sweetheart, are you sitting down?" She could see him crying and laughing simultaneously as he spoke, the tears of vindication tracing lines down his face. "No, honey, you absolutely don't need to transfer schools. In fact, your father just became an executive vice president. Your medical school is fully funded, all 4 years. Focus on becoming the incredible doctor I know you'll be." When Jerome returned, his eyes were bright with pure, unadulterated joy. "How does it feel?" Victoria asked quietly. "Like I remember who I really am," he said softly. "Like I'm finally home." 6 months later, Jerome's corner office on the 32nd floor was the operational nexus of the new Sterling dynamics. Victoria often stopped by just to watch the transformation. On his desk sat his daily reminder, his old framed driver's license, placed directly beside Mr. Nakamura's antique, ceremonial business card case, the symbol of his true, unassailable worth. "Any regrets about that morning in the car?" Victoria asked. "Not anymore," Jerome replied seriously. "That moment brought us both to where we needed to be. You gave me the greatest gift that day, the chance to prove that worth isn't measured by a uniform or a title." Victoria smiled, a genuine, hard-won expression. "Funny how much you see when you actually look." Jerome stood, turning to address the camera of the documentary crew that had tracked their story, his voice now carrying the full, unshakable authority of the diplomat and the owner. "Right now, someone is serving your coffee who speaks 4 languages. Someone cleaning your office has an engineering degree. Someone is driving your Uber who used to run international negotiations." His tone shifted to a sharper, triggering challenge. "Tomorrow morning when you interact with service workers, ask yourself, what talents am I not seeing? What potential am I dismissing? What story am I missing?" He stepped closer to the lens, delivering the final, absolute command. "Here's what I want you to do. Find one person this week whose job title doesn't match their potential. Really talk to them. Ask about their background, their dreams, their skills. Then do something about it. Make an introduction. Write a recommendation. Share their story. Small actions create big changes." "We started the Jerome Washington Foundation to connect displaced talent with companies that need them." Victoria joined him, her voice strong. "But the real change happens when you decide to see people differently. It happens when you choose to look past uniforms and job titles to the human being underneath." Jerome delivered the final, crushing punchline. Because talent doesn't wear designer suits. Brilliance doesn't need corner offices. Worth isn't measured by your paycheck. It's revealed by your character. If this story touched you, share it. Tag someone who needs to hear it. Help us build a world where everyone gets seen for who they really are.